All right, this video I'm going to be looking at graphing rational functions. This is the third video on this, so if you have not watched the first two, I highly recommend that because there's some things I'm going to go through that are talked about a little bit more in depth in the first and second video. So we're going to graph state the asymptotes, the domain, and range of this rational function. So we have y equals 4x plus 7 divided by 2x minus 8. The first thing I notice about this equation, which is something I talked about in graphing rational functions 1 and 2, is we're no longer of the form of, just some constant a up top and have an x minus h plus k. So we're no longer of that form. This one's different because I now have x's on top and bottom. So that is going to change things a little bit. So we still have to kind of find the asymptotes. In the other video, we found asymptotes, the center, all that. If we know the center, we know the asymptotes, domain, range, all that. We're still going to kind of go on that path. So one of the asymptotes had to deal with this bottom here, x minus h, and h gave us one of our asymptotes. We're still going to work with the denominator because remember, we're dealing with a fraction here. And one problem is we never want our denominator equal to 0. So to find one of our asymptotes, this is the easier of the two asymptotes to kind of remember how to find is we're going to take the denominator, which is the bottom, and set it equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to have 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. So quickly solving that, again, we're setting it equal to 0 because remember we cannot divide by 0. So you would add 8, add 8. So I'm going to have 2x is equal to 8. Divide by 2, and we get x is equal to 4. So we're going to hold on to that for 1 second, and I'll come back to that. That's going to be one of our key pieces here. If you remember from all the videos, the asymptotes, we have an x equals and a y equals asymptote. We have to find the y equals asymptote. Now this one's a little bit different to find. Notice how I have x, a single x on top and another x on bottom. To find the other one, what we're going to do, and this is going to be the y equals asymptote, what we do is we take the coefficient of x on top. Now coefficient is the math term for the number in front of x on top, and so in this case it's 4, and divide it by the coefficient of x on bottom, so the number in front of x on bottom. So we're going to take 4 divided by 2. Essentially what we're taking there is those two numbers right there and divide them. So sometimes we're going to get fractions. This one, we got 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So solving here, my two asymptotes are x equals 4 and y equals 2. Now, what that's going to be is it's also going to be how I've talked about the center point in other videos. This is still our center point when it comes to graphing. So I'm going to go over 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and up 2. Lightly put a point there because that's not actually part of our graph. And I'll get back to the graphing here in a second. But what I need to figure out is these are my two asymptotes, but what I want to get into on this video a little bit more is figure out when you have an x equals and a y equals, which one's a horizontal and which one's a vertical. Now there's a key phrase because these are horizontal and vertical lines. I just don't know which one it is. There's a key little expression we use to help kind of remember what are horizontal lines looking like and what are vertical lines looking like. That saying is hoi vux, and that is an acronym there. So hoi vux. It seems stupid maybe at first, but this will keep track of many important things that have to do with horizontal and vertical lines. Notice how they each start with H and V. H is going to represent horizontal, and V represents vertical. So all the information over here is for horizontal lines, all the information here is with vertical lines. The next two pieces may not be so important with what we're doing here, but it is good knowledge to know. The O represents a 0 slope. So horizontal lines have 0 slope. Vertical lines, the U there is for undefined. So vertical lines have an undefined slope. The last bit will give you the clue as to what each of these is, a horizontal or vertical line. The Y signifies, hey, Y equals equations like this are horizontal. So Y equals 2, I now know because of hoi and the Y in hoi that the Y represents a horizontal asymptote. So we have Y equals 2. Vux, V vertical, undefined. The X represents X equals. So X equals some constant, some number. Those are vertical equations or vertical lines. So X equals 4 is my vertical asymptote. X equals 4. Since I'm just here already, we can go ahead and talk about the domain and range. The domain is always going to follow the pattern of we're going to have all real numbers for rational functions, except remember, asymptotes is something in rational functions that we're not going to cross. So we never cross it, we're going to approach it. So all real numbers, and remember domains, you think about X, range, you think about Y. So we're allowed all real numbers, but I'm not allowed to have X equals to 4. See how that matches up, 4 and 4? And then range, we're still going to have all real numbers. But remember, range deals with Y, but I'm not allowed to have a Y equal to 2 because that is an asymptote. So Y is restricted on 2. And this will make more sense as well when we look at the graph. So as kind of in my previous videos, I talked about that center point. That center point is what makes my kind of crosshair there of asymptotes. So I'm going to use a highlighter to show my asymptotes. The only thing left to do is actually graph this rational function. So I got to figure out am I in these two corners or in these two corners. The way we know that is if we look at the front of this function, look at if it's positive or negative. So remember how A kind of came into play. If it's positive here, if it's negative, we reflect and we're the other two corners. Same idea here. Since we're positive, we're going to be these two. So my sketch is going to follow the asymptote, pull away from the center and go from the other asymptote. There's the bottom left and the top right there. And again, we can see domain and range. I'm allowed all these X values, but when X equals 4, if you plugged it in, it would not work. For the range, we talked about all real numbers, but Y can't be 2. There's always a Y is paired up with an X. If you see, and then except when Y is positive 2, there's no X value paired up with it. So there's my asymptotes, domain and range, and my graph, and that was Graphing Rational Functions 3.